"Do you think I'm worth saving?" the shaking gunslinger asked the Lakota woman. The wind carried the smell of dry grass, and the faint smoke from the small fires scattered across the Lakota village. The villagers were busy with their evening routines, some tending to the animals, others finishing their work or preparing simple meals. It was a place where the land seemed alive, breathing slowly with the rhythm of its people. But that evening, something unusual approached the village, a figure hunched and weary, moving unsteadily along the dirt trail. He came into view like a shadow stretching across the plains. His boots kicked up dust with every step, his hat pulled low over his eyes, and his coat hanging loosely from his shoulders. He was a man who had clearly walked many miles, and every part of him told a story of struggle. His hands, shaking slightly, rested near the handles of two old revolvers. The villagers, alert and cautious, paused in their tasks. Children stopped playing, sensing the tension in the air even before the man came closer. The Lakota woman noticed him first. She was sitting outside her small dwelling, weaving a basket, her eyes sharp and observant. She could tell immediately that he was not like the travelers who occasionally passed through their lands. There was something fragile about him, but also something dangerous. The way he moved, careful yet uncertain, spoke of a man carrying heavy burdens. She set the basket aside, her fingers brushing over the woven reeds as she rose to her feet. The man stopped at the edge of the village, leaning heavily on a worn walking stick. His face was partially hidden by the shadow of his hat, but the few glimpses that could be seen told a story of exhaustion and fear. Dust and sweat clung to his skin, and a few old scars were visible on his hands and neck. He looked around, his eyes darting nervously, and then he fell to one knee as if the weight of the day had finally caught up with him. A hush fell over the villagers. They had seen many travelers, but this man was different. He did not call out for food or water. He did not ask for shelter. Instead, he simply whispered almost to himself, "Do you think I'm worth saving?" His voice was weak and trembling, carrying a mixture of hope and despair. It was a question that seemed too heavy for the quiet evening air, yet it was carried with a sincerity that could not be ignored. The Lakota woman stepped forward slowly, her movements deliberate, her eyes never leaving his. She had heard many stories of travelers who came to their lands, some with kindness in their hearts and some with darkness. She did not know which this man carried, but she sensed that beneath his fear and weariness, there was a soul searching for something, perhaps redemption, perhaps forgiveness. He looked up at her, his eyes wide and haunted. There was a moment of silence, a pause in which the world seemed to hold its breath. The children, sensing the seriousness of the moment, stayed close to their parents. The men and women of the village watched from a distance, unsure whether to step forward or stay back. The Lakota woman, however, remained calm. She had seen broken men before, men whose hands were stained with mistakes, yet still capable of change if given guidance and understanding. "Come," she said softly, her voice steady but kind. "You will not be judged here, at least not until we understand you." He nodded, slowly rising to his feet, though the tremor in his hands did not fade. Every step he took toward the village was heavy with uncertainty. The villagers watched, some skeptical, others curious, as he moved closer to the center of the camp. The Lakota woman guided him gently, motioning to a small shaded area where he could rest. He sank onto a log, his body finally giving in to exhaustion. Water was brought to him, and he drank slowly, not speaking a word. The Lakota woman knelt beside him, her eyes studying his face, reading the lines of fatigue and pain. She did not ask him to explain himself immediately. She knew that trust was earned slowly, that a man who had walked through darkness might need time before he could speak of it. Gradually, he began to talk, in fragments at first, then with more clarity. He told her about the long roads he had traveled, the towns he had passed, and the people he had met. He did not hide the mistakes he had made, nor the lives he had failed to protect. Each word was heavy with guilt, yet he spoke them as though speaking aloud could somehow lessen the weight of his past. The Lakota woman listened without interruption. She had learned long ago that judgment often hardened hearts rather than healing them. Sometimes, a listening ear was the first step toward understanding and change. She nodded occasionally, offering small words of encouragement, letting him know that his presence in the village was not unwelcome, though caution was still necessary. The evening grew darker, and the stars began to appear in the clear sky above. The villagers slowly returned to their activities, though they kept a respectful distance, aware that something delicate was unfolding. The gunslinger's eyes followed every movement, yet he did not reach for his weapons. Perhaps it was the calm presence of the Lakota woman, or perhaps it was the realization that he was no longer alone in the world. As night fell, a fire was lit in the center of the village. The gunslinger sat near it, the warmth easing some of the tension in his shoulders. The Lakota woman sat beside him, not speaking, simply offering a silent companionship. He stared into the flames, lost in thought, the shadows dancing across his tired face. Memories of battles, of lost friends, of choices he could not undo, flickered in his mind like the flames before him. For the first time in many years, he allowed himself to hope that perhaps he could find a place where he belonged. Not a place to hide from the past, but a place where he could begin to make amends, even in small ways. The question he had asked earlier, "Do you think I'm worth saving?" hung in the air, unanswered yet not dismissed. It was a question that would guide his path, one that the Lakota woman understood he needed to explore for himself. Hours passed, and sleep finally claimed him, though rest was uneasy. The Lakota woman watched over him, her presence a silent assurance that he was not alone. She did not know what the future held, nor whether he could truly change, but she recognized the spark of humanity still burning within him. Sometimes, that spark was all it took to start a journey toward redemption. The village slept under a blanket of stars, the fires flickering softly in the night. The gunslinger's breathing grew steady, though his dreams were haunted by shadows of the past. And yet there was a fragile sense of hope, a feeling that perhaps in this quiet corner of the world he might begin to answer the question he had asked, whether he was indeed worth saving. Dawn would come soon, and with it, the first steps of a journey that neither he nor the village could yet fully understand. But in that moment, as the night wrapped the world in its quiet embrace, there was a fragile peace, a beginning. The morning sun broke over the horizon, spilling warm light across the plains and slowly waking the Lakota village. Birds called from the trees, and the soft sounds of life stirred the people from their rest. The gunslinger awoke with a start, the memories of his past clinging to him like the shadows in the corners of the small cabin where he had been given shelter. He rubbed his tired eyes and looked around. The village was already alive with movement. Children ran across the open space, laughing and playing with sticks and small wooden toys, while adults tended to chores, preparing food and caring for animals. The Lakota woman, whose calm presence had drawn him toward the village the night before, appeared at the doorway. She carried a small basket of food, fresh bread, and dried meat for him. "Eat," she said simply, setting the basket on the table. Her voice was gentle but firm, and he noticed the quiet authority in the way she spoke. It was not just words. It was a lesson in care, patience, and respect all at once. He hesitated at first, unsure of his place in this community. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the bread, breaking it into small pieces. She watched him quietly, not pressuring, but allowing him the dignity of choosing his own pace. After a moment, he began to eat, slowly, deliberately, as though each bite was a small act of grounding himself in the present moment. Once he finished, the Lakota woman gestured for him to follow her outside. The village was bathed in sunlight now, the plains stretching endlessly beyond the wooden fences. "There is work to do," she said. If you are to stay, you must learn to contribute. Life here is about balance, about helping one another, not about the things you cannot change." The gunslinger nodded, though his mind was restless. He had spent years moving from town to town, fighting battles and surviving by his wits. Work had always been physical and violent, requiring quick hands and a quicker trigger. But this was different. This work required patience, care, and a willingness to be part of a community rather than just passing through it. He started small. At first, he helped repair fences around the livestock pens. The wood was old, some of it splintered, and he had to use his strength carefully to avoid breaking it further. The Lakota woman stood nearby, giving guidance. "Do not rush," she advised. "Hurry makes mistakes. Listen to the wood, feel it as it bends and holds." It was a lesson he struggled with. His hands, always used to the quick pull of a trigger, trembled as he nailed boards in place. Several times he bent the wrong piece or hammered too hard, splitting the wood. Each time the Lakota woman calmly showed him the correct method, her patience never wavering. Slowly, he began to understand her meaning, not just in the work but in life. Strength alone was not enough. It needed to be guided by care, attention, and thought. As the days passed, he took on more responsibilities. He helped with the animals, guiding horses and mending small injuries. He learned to gather firewood and even assist in cooking under her watchful eye. Each task was a reminder that life in the village was connected, each action affecting others, and that violence and fear had no place in these simple, necessary tasks. The villagers began to notice his efforts. Some were skeptical at first, remembering tales of his past from travelers passing through. Others watched quietly, curious to see if he could truly adapt to this way of life. A few children began to follow him, imitating his actions, asking questions, and laughing at his awkwardness with tasks he had never performed before. The gunslinger found himself smiling more than he had in years, the warmth of simple companionship easing some of the weight on his shoulders. At night, around the fire, the Lakota woman spoke to him about the ways of her people. She told stories of the land, of the spirits that lived in the rivers, the hills, and the sky above. She spoke of courage not as the ability to fight, but as the strength to face oneself, to make choices even when the past haunted and fear lingered. The gunslinger listened, fascinated and humbled. He realized that he had never truly considered the consequences of his actions or the value of life beyond his own survival. One evening, as the fire crackled and sparks floated into the night sky, he spoke for the first time about the lives he had taken, the people he had failed to protect. His voice was low, heavy with guilt, but the Lakota woman did not flinch. She listened, acknowledging his words without judgment. "You cannot change what has been," she said softly, "but you can choose what comes next. That is the power you have now." The words struck him deeply. He had spent years running from the ghosts of his past, believing himself unworthy of trust or care. Yet here was someone who saw him, not as a man defined by his mistakes, but as a man who could learn and grow. It was a small spark, but it felt like the first light he had seen in years. Over time, he began to teach himself restraint. His hands, once quick to reach for the guns at the slightest sign of danger, trembled less as he performed daily tasks. He learned to breathe deeply, to think before acting, and to feel the presence of others rather than fearing them. Each day was a battle, not against an enemy, but against his own impulses, his own fears, and the doubt that he carried like a constant companion. The Lakota woman encouraged him to speak to the villagers, to share what he had learned and experienced. At first, he was hesitant. How could he speak of mistakes that had hurt others? How could he explain the weight of years spent in fear and violence? But gradually he began to open up, telling stories of the roads he had traveled, the mistakes he had made, and the lessons he was learning now. The villagers listened, some nodding in understanding, others silent, reflecting on the power of change and forgiveness. It was not easy for them to accept him fully, but they could see his effort, the sincerity in his eyes, and the gradual transformation taking place. He was not the same man who had stumbled into their village weeks ago. He was a man learning to live differently, to honor life and the connections that bound them all together. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled across the plains. Wind tore at the trees, and rain pelted the village with heavy drops. The gunslinger sprang into action, helping secure animals, reinforcing shelters, and assisting the villagers in any way he could. For the first time, he felt a sense of belonging, not because he had proved himself with a weapon, but because he had proven that he could care, that he could protect, and that he could contribute. The Lakota woman observed him silently, pride flickering in her eyes. He had begun to understand the lesson she had been teaching him. Courage was not in the gun, but in the heart. Strength was not in fighting, but in choosing to do what was right. The storm passed, leaving the village wet but safe, and the gunslinger felt a quiet satisfaction he had never known before. As night fell, he sat again by the fire, feeling the warmth on his face and the calm of the village around him. The Lakota woman joined him, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "You are learning," she said simply. "Each day, each choice, each act of care brings you closer to the person you can become." For the first time in years, he felt hope that was not fleeting or tied to luck. He realized that being saved did not mean forgetting the past or escaping the mistakes he had made. It meant choosing to act differently, to live in a way that honored life rather than destroyed it. And though the journey ahead was uncertain, he felt ready to take the next steps, guided by the lessons of patience, care, and understanding that the Lakota woman had shown him. Sleep came that night with less fear and more peace. The sound of the wind through the trees, the gentle crackle of the fire, and the quiet breathing of the village became a lullaby of belonging. And as he closed his eyes, he whispered again, this time with a small smile, "Maybe I am worth saving." The days in the village grew longer and warmer as spring spread across the plains. Flowers bloomed along the edges of the trails, and the fields shimmered green with new growth. The gunslinger had begun to settle into a routine, though every morning brought a new challenge. He no longer woke with fear of strangers or the reflex to reach for his weapons, but instead with a quiet determination to be better than he had been yesterday. The Lakota woman continued to guide him, teaching him not only practical skills but also lessons about patience, observation, and empathy. "The land speaks," she said one morning, pointing to the gentle flow of the river nearby. "Listen, not with your ears but with your heart. Every tree, every stone, every animal carries a message." At first, he struggled to understand. How could a tree speak? How could the rustle of the river or the flight of a bird tell him anything? Yet he followed her instructions, slowing his movements, watching carefully and noticing details he had never seen before. The patterns in the clouds, the rhythm of the wind, the way the animals moved, everything became part of a bigger picture. Slowly, he began to feel a connection to the land he had never known. Work in the village became a kind of meditation for him. Each morning, he helped with chores, guiding animals, mending fences, and gathering wood. Each evening, he practiced listening to the wind, to the sounds of the village, to the subtle cues of the people around him. The villagers had begun to trust him more. Children would run to him when he approached, laughing and asking for help with small tasks. Adults would nod in recognition when he assisted with larger chores. Though some still remained cautious, most had begun to see the change in him. One afternoon, while repairing a broken cartwheel with the Lakota woman nearby, he asked a question he had been holding inside for days. "Why do you trust me?" His voice was soft, almost unsure. "I've done bad things. People I couldn't save, people I hurt. Why do you think I can change?" The Lakota woman looked at him with calm, steady eyes. She placed a hand on the wheel they were repairing. "Change is not about forgetting the past," she said gently. It is about choosing what you do with the life you have now. You carry your mistakes, yes, but you also carry the chance to be better. That is what matters. Her words settled in his mind like seeds in fertile soil. He realized that the village had offered him more than shelter or safety. They had offered him hope, and hope was something he had believed he had lost forever. From that day, he began to take each task with more intention, not just doing work to survive, but doing it to learn, to grow, and to be part of something larger than himself. Days turned into weeks, and the gunslinger's connection to the village deepened. He learned to read the weather, understanding when storms were coming by the shape of the clouds and the movement of the wind. He learned to recognize the tracks of animals and how to move quietly without startling them. He learned to help others without expecting reward, to listen without judgment, and to act without fear. One morning, the Lakota woman took him to the river that ran near the edge of the village. The water flowed calmly, reflecting the bright sky above. "The river teaches patience," she said, gesturing to the gentle currents. "It moves steadily, carving paths through the land, yet it never rushes. It follows its course, strong and persistent." He knelt beside the water, watching the current swirl around the rocks and drift past the reeds. For the first time, he felt something he had not felt in years: peace. The river, with its quiet strength, seemed to mirror the changes he was trying to make in himself. He realized that he had been rushing through life, fighting every battle with fear and anger, without understanding the consequences or the value of connection. As the weeks passed, small moments of triumph began to accumulate. He helped a villager mend a broken roof during a sudden windstorm. He guided a young boy in learning to ride a horse without fear. He even began to teach some of the children small skills he had learned from his life on the road, showing them the importance of self-reliance while also emphasizing care and respect. Each act built his confidence and deepened the villagers' trust. But change was not always easy. One evening, a memory from his past came rushing back, an image of a man he had failed to save, a child he had been unable to protect. He sat by the fire, staring into the flames, and felt the old guilt threatening to consume him. The Lakota woman sat beside him, noticing the shadow cross his face. "The past cannot be changed," she reminded him softly. "You can honor it by living well now, by making choices that bring life instead of harm." Her words grounded him. He realized that dwelling on the past only kept him trapped, while focusing on the present and the future gave him power. He began to speak more openly about his regrets, sharing his stories with the villagers not to frighten them or seek forgiveness, but to help himself and others understand that mistakes could be acknowledged without being carried forever. The village had begun to feel like home, a place where he could belong without fear. Yet, even as he grew stronger, he knew that challenges were still ahead. He could feel it, a sense that his past would not easily let him forget, that the world outside the village was still full of threats and choices that could test the lessons he had learned. One afternoon, while tending to the livestock near the edge of the village, he noticed a group of riders in the distance. Their movements were fast and purposeful, and he felt the old tension in his body, the reflex to reach for his weapons. But this time, he paused. He breathed deeply, recalling the teachings of the Lakota woman. Strength was not about fighting first. It was about understanding, patience, and choosing wisely. He watched as the riders approached, noticing their patterns, their speed, and the direction they were taking. He could sense that they were outsiders, but he did not immediately assume threat. Instead, he moved carefully, staying alert while also considering how to respond without unnecessary violence. The villagers, sensing his calm, followed his lead, trusting him to guide them through whatever was coming. The riders passed the village without incident, and the gunslinger felt a quiet relief. Yet the encounter reminded him that the world outside remained unpredictable and dangerous. He realized that his journey of redemption was not just about learning patience and care. It was also about preparing for challenges, about balancing caution with courage. That evening, he sat once more by the fire, reflecting on the lessons he had learned. He realized that true strength was not measured by skill with a weapon, but by the choices one made when faced with fear, guilt, or anger. The villagers had shown him that trust could be earned, that care could heal wounds, and that connection with others brought meaning beyond survival. The Lakota woman joined him, her presence steady and comforting. "You have come far," she said, "but remember, each day is a test. Not of your skill, but of your heart. Keep learning, keep listening, and you will continue to grow." He nodded, feeling a sense of purpose he had not known in years. The road to redemption was not finished, but he now understood that it was a path worth walking. Each day offered choices, each action carried meaning, and each connection with the people and the land strengthened his resolve. Sleep came peacefully that night, the stars shining brightly above the village. The river whispered its quiet lessons in the distance, the fire crackled softly, and the village rested under the calm night sky. The gunslinger closed his eyes, feeling a fragile hope that had taken root in his heart. He knew that the journey ahead would be difficult, that mistakes could still be made, but he also knew that he was no longer alone. The village, the Lakota woman, and the land itself had become guides, showing him that life could be lived differently, with care, patience, and courage. And for the first time in many years, he felt a sense of belonging, not just to a place, but to a way of life, a way of seeing the world that gave him a chance to answer the question that had haunted him for so long: am I worth saving? With each lesson, each day, and each choice, he began to realize that perhaps, just perhaps, the answer could be yes. The sun had barely risen when a distant cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. The villagers were finishing their morning chores when the gunslinger noticed the movement first. His body tensed instinctively, the old reflexes of a lifetime on the road rising to the surface. He had spent weeks learning to calm himself, to act with care rather than fear, but there was no hiding the truth. Something from his past had followed him here. He squinted at the approaching figures, counting 4 riders on horseback. They moved with precision, their posture confident and purposeful. The gunslinger recognized the signs immediately. These were men from his past, men who had once been his allies but now sought revenge. Memories he had tried to bury surfaced, the arguments, the betrayals, the times when a misstep had led to loss. For a moment, he felt the familiar rush of fear and anger, the old pulse that demanded action through violence. The Lakota woman appeared at his side, sensing the tension. "Breathe," she instructed, her voice calm but firm. "Observe first. The first act is always to understand, not to strike." He nodded, swallowing hard, his hands tightening slightly at his sides. The villagers watched from behind the fences and dwellings, some frightened, others curious. They had grown to trust him over the weeks, but they did not fully know the depth of his past, nor the danger that now approached their quiet home. The riders drew closer, and the gunslinger stepped forward to meet them. The lead rider, a tall man with a harsh face and piercing eyes, reined in his horse a short distance from the village. "We've been looking for you," he called, his voice carrying across the fields. "It's time to settle old debts." The gunslinger's mind raced. He could feel the old instincts urging him to reach for his weapons, to defend himself with the only method he had ever truly known. But he remembered the lessons of the Lakota woman, the lessons of patience, restraint, and courage defined by choices rather than fear. He lowered his hand slightly, speaking instead. "I don't want more blood," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor of tension beneath it. "I've made mistakes, yes, but I am not the man I was. I have chosen a different path." The riders laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "Words don't change the past," one of them said. "We came for justice, and we won't leave until we have it." The gunslinger glanced at the village behind him. The people he had grown to care for were watching, their trust in him, and in his choices adding weight to his decisions. He realized that this was not just about him anymore. It was about the community he had begun to protect, the lives he had started to honor. The Lakota woman stepped forward, placing herself near him. Her presence was calm, unwavering, a reminder that courage was not the absence of fear but the ability to act despite it. "They will not harm the village," she said quietly, "if you remain strong in your choices." He took a deep breath and addressed the riders once more. "There will be no fight here. I will not run and I will not strike first. If you seek justice, you must speak with me, not with guns drawn at innocent lives." For a tense moment, silence fell. The wind stirred the grass around them and the villagers held their breath. The lead rider hesitated, clearly unprepared for such calm resistance. Slowly he dismounted, signaling the others to do the same. "Fine," he said, his tone wary. "We will talk." The gunslinger led them to the edge of the village, away from the dwellings and livestock, keeping his movements deliberate and careful. The Lakota woman followed at a respectful distance, ready to intervene if needed, but trusting that he had the strength to navigate this challenge without violence. As they faced each other, the gunslinger spoke first. "I have been many things," he said. "A man who made mistakes, a man who failed people I cared about. I am not asking for forgiveness, but I am asking that you hear me. Violence will only continue the cycle. I have chosen a different path, one of care and responsibility." The lead rider's eyes narrowed, suspicion and anger evident. "Talk is cheap," he said. "You cannot erase what you have done." "I do not seek to erase it," the gunslinger replied. "I only seek to live differently now. I have found people in a place that matters. If you want justice, do it fairly, not by harming those who did not wrong you." A tense negotiation began. The riders demanded acknowledgement of their grievances, recounting the events of the past that had led them here. The gunslinger listened carefully, acknowledging his role without exaggeration or excuse. Each word was chosen with care, reflecting the patience and restraint he had been learning for weeks. The Lakota woman observed silently, allowing him to speak for himself, knowing that the truth and sincerity of his actions would carry more weight than threats or anger. Hours passed in careful discussion. The sun climbed high, beating down on the plains, and the villagers continued their work quietly, knowing better than to interfere. Gradually, the riders began to see the change in the gunslinger. He was no longer the reckless man they had known. His words were honest, his demeanor steady, and his commitment to his new life evident in the way he spoke of the village and its people. Finally, the lead rider spoke, his tone softer but still wary. "Perhaps you have changed," he admitted. "But change is not proven by words alone. It must be shown through action." The gunslinger nodded, accepting the challenge without resentment. "I will show it," he said. "I will continue to live in a way that honors life, protects the innocent, and learns from the past." With that, the riders mounted their horses and rode away, leaving the village intact. The tension in the air slowly eased, replaced by a quiet relief. The villagers emerged from their hiding places, their eyes reflecting admiration and gratitude. The gunslinger's hands were still trembling slightly, but it was no longer the trembling of fear. It was the trembling of a man who had faced his past and chosen a better path. The Lakota woman stood beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You have faced your past without losing yourself," she said. "That is true courage. Remember this lesson, for life will continue to test you." He exhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the encounter lift from his shoulders. He realized that the fight had never been about defeating others. It had been about mastering himself, controlling his impulses, and proving that change was possible. Over the following days, the village celebrated his courage quietly, not with loud festivities but with small gestures of respect. Children sought his guidance, villagers asked for his help in tasks, and the bonds he had formed grew stronger. He felt a sense of belonging that had eluded him for years, and he understood that his past would always be a part of him, but it did not have to define him. The encounter with the riders had tested everything he had learned: the patience, the restraint, the empathy. He had emerged not only unbroken but stronger, more aware of the power of choice and the importance of protecting those who could not protect themselves. At night, by the fire, he reflected on the events. The Lakota woman joined him, her eyes reflecting the flames. "Every challenge will teach you more," she said. "Courage, patience, and wisdom are not just learned, they are earned moment by moment." He nodded, understanding fully now that redemption was not a single act but a continuous journey. Each day offered a choice: to act in fear or with care, to repeat the mistakes of the past, or to create a future that honored life and connection. Sleep came that night with a sense of peace deeper than he had known. The stars shone brightly above, the river whispered in the distance, and the village rested safely. The gunslinger closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his past lesson not because it was forgotten, but because he had faced it with courage and made the choice to live differently. And as he drifted into dreams, he whispered to himself, "I will continue to be worth saving." The sun rose gently over the plains, painting the village in soft gold and pink. The air was calm, carrying the smell of fresh grass and warm earth. Birds sang from the trees, and the river flowed quietly, reflecting the sky above. Life in the village had settled into a rhythm, and the gunslinger felt the comforting sense of belonging that had slowly grown over weeks. He was no longer the trembling, haunted man who had stumbled into their midst. He had begun to understand what it meant to be part of a community, to be responsible not only for himself, but for the lives around him. That morning the Lakota woman approached him, carrying a small bundle of herbs and cloth. "There is work to be done," she said, her voice calm but filled with quiet authority. "The village grows and every hand matters. But today, I also want you to reflect on how far you have come." He followed her to the fields, where the villagers were tending to crops and repairing homes. He helped lift heavy tools, guide animals, and work alongside the others, no longer awkward or hesitant. Each task was a reminder that life was built on care, attention, and collaboration. He felt a sense of pride, not from accomplishment alone, but from knowing that his actions contributed to the well-being of others. As he worked, he thought of the past, the mistakes he had made, the lives he had failed to protect, and the fear that had once ruled his every step. Those memories no longer held the power to paralyze him. He had faced them, not by running or hiding, but by choosing a different path. And in doing so, he realized that redemption was not something given. It was earned through consistent actions, patience, and courage. Later that afternoon, the village gathered near the river for a small celebration. It was not a festival with music and dancing, but a quiet acknowledgement of the bonds they had formed and the growth that had taken place. Children ran and played, laughing freely, while adults shared food and conversation. The gunslinger watched them, feeling a warmth he had never known. He had always been alone, drifting from place to place, carrying the weight of his failures. But now he was part of something larger, a living community that valued trust, care, and connection. The Lakota woman approached him, her eyes meeting his. "You have learned much," she said softly, "not just how to live with others, but how to live with yourself. You have faced fear, guilt, and the shadows of the past, and you have chosen to act with courage and care. That is the true measure of a man." He looked down at his hands, which were no longer shaking as they had been when he first arrived. He felt a quiet strength, a sense of peace that he had not thought possible. "I still have doubts," he admitted. "I still wonder if I am worthy of trust, worthy of life itself." She smiled gently. "Worthy is not something given or taken. It is something recognized through actions. You have proven yourself worthy not by words, but by what you have done and how you have changed. Every choice you make now continues that proof." The gunslinger nodded, feeling a deep gratitude for her guidance. She had not judged him harshly, nor had she promised easy forgiveness. Instead, she had shown him the path and allowed him to walk it himself. That was a lesson far greater than any he had learned on the road, and it was one he would carry for the rest of his life. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, a small incident tested the gunslinger once more. A young boy had wandered too close to the riverbank, where the current was swift. Without hesitation, he ran to the edge, calling to the child to stay calm. Using the skills he had learned from the village, he guided the boy back to safety, demonstrating both care and courage. The villagers watched in quiet admiration, recognizing that he was no longer the man who had stumbled into their lives in fear and uncertainty. He had become someone who could act wisely, protect others, and inspire trust. That evening, around the fire, the villagers shared stories of their day. The gunslinger sat quietly, listening, and occasionally adding small words of encouragement or advice. Children sat near him, asking questions about the world beyond the village and the lessons he had learned. He spoke to them not with pride, but with honesty and care, emphasizing the importance of choice, respect, and understanding. The Lakota woman joined him once more, settling beside him with the gentle calm that had guided him from the beginning. "Do you now feel worthy?" she asked, her voice soft but steady, echoing the question he had asked so many nights ago. He thought for a long moment, staring into the flickering flames. He remembered the trembling hands, the fear that had gripped him when he first arrived, the memories of those he had failed, and the men who had come seeking revenge. He remembered how far he had come, how he had learned patience, empathy, and courage, and how the village had accepted him despite his past. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but steady. "I think I am learning to be." The Lakota woman smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "That is enough," she said. "Worth is not a destination but a journey. You have begun that journey with honesty, courage, and care. That is what matters." As the night deepened, the villagers settled into their homes, the fire's warmth fading to embers. The gunslinger remained outside for a while longer, staring at the stars above. The vast plains stretched endlessly, peaceful and full of life. He felt connected, not just to the land but to the people, to the lessons he had learned, and to the man he was becoming. For the first time in many years, he felt a quiet joy, the kind that comes from belonging, from understanding, and from the realization that the past, no matter how dark, did not have to define him. He had faced his mistakes, confronted his fears, and chosen a path of care and responsibility. In doing so, he had found something he had thought lost forever: hope. The next morning, the gunslinger rose early, helping with the chores before anyone else. He worked alongside the villagers, tending to the fields, guiding the animals, and sharing small lessons he had learned. Each act, no matter how small, reinforced his sense of purpose. He had come to understand that redemption was not a single event but a lifetime of choices, and he was determined to continue making those choices wisely. Over the following weeks, he became an integral part of the village. He guided travelers who passed by, assisted in teaching the children, and worked tirelessly to protect and nurture the land and the people. He had transformed from a man haunted by fear and guilt into a man of strength, patience, and integrity. The Lakota woman watched him often, her quiet pride evident. She had seen the change that had taken place, the man who had once asked if he was worth saving now acting in ways that proved he always had been. His actions, his care for others, and his ability to face the world with courage and honesty were all evidence of the person he had become. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains, the gunslinger and the Lakota woman walked together along the riverbank. The air was calm, the sound of the water gentle, and the village behind them peaceful. "You have done well," she said, her voice carrying warmth and approval. "You have faced fear, embraced change, and proven that redemption is possible." He looked at her, gratitude shining in his eyes. "I could not have done it without you," he admitted. "You showed me the path and gave me the chance to walk it," she smiled. "The path was always yours to choose. I only helped you see it. Remember, each day is a choice and each choice matters." The gunslinger nodded, feeling a deep sense of peace. For the first time in years, he did not feel the weight of the past pressing down on him. Instead, he felt light, free to move forward, and ready to continue his journey of care, courage, and connection. As the stars appeared in the night sky, the gunslinger sat by the river, reflecting on his journey. He thought of the trembling hands that had brought him to the village, the questions of worth and redemption that had haunted him, and the lessons that had transformed his life. He realized that he had finally found a place where he belonged, a place where he could continue to grow, learn, and live with integrity. And in that quiet moment, with the river whispering its gentle song and the stars shining above, he finally understood the answer to the question that had followed him for so long. Yes, I am worth saving, and I will continue to be. The village slept peacefully behind him, the people safe, the land calm, and the man who had once been lost finally at home. His journey was not over, but he now faced it with hope, courage, and the knowledge that the choices he made each day could honor the past and shape a better future.